Guess who's back? It's another math episode from Mr. Mac. Alright. So today we'll be working on the Test 8 review tasks. Specifically, task number 1 will be finding percents mentally, estimating, and using the percent proportion along with the equation. So for question number 1, we're going to order the following numbers from least to greatest and plot them on the number line. Before we can order these numbers, let's make sure they're all in the same format, either in decimals or percentages. Now when I take a look at the number line, they're all in decimals. So let's start by converting each number into a decimal so we can compare them easily. For instance, the first one, 67.5%, as a decimal, that's known as 0.675. In order to convert that percent to a decimal, we divide by 100. When we divide it by 100, the decimal moves over 2 place values to the left, and that becomes our new decimal. Let me just rewrite it for us. The next one, a common one, 3/5. We convert that into a decimal, and when we convert that to a decimal, 3 divided by 5 gives us a quotient of 0.6. Then for number 3, we have 0.63. That is already in decimal format, so I'm just going to write that down as 0.63. Number 4 is 13/20, and we do that the same way we did the one previously. We divide 13 by 20, and that gives us 0.65. And lastly, we have the last one, which is number 5, which is 66 2/3%. And as a decimal, number 5, also known as 66 2/3%, is equivalent to the decimal 0.66. I'll put another 6, repeating forever for the rest of its life. Now when we look at the number line, I see that there's a 0.60 here, and there's a 0.65 over here. I'm just going to count how many spaces is in between them. 1, 2, 3, 4. In order for me to get to the last one, it's 5 units over. So I can automatically assume that each of them is going up by 0.01. So the next few numbers I'm going to fill in. So let's start. Number 1, which is known as 0.0675. Now that may be a little bit confusing for everyone. So what I recommend, since the first one goes to 3 values after the decimal, also known as our thousands place, I'd add a 0 to every value, just so it's a little bit easier to compare. Awesome. So now we have to move on to graphing the 0.675. I see that 0.670 is over here to the right, 0.680 is over here, so 0.675 falls perfectly in the middle. I'm just going to draw a line from our number line, and we're going to label that as our 67.5%. Now let's move on to the next item. Next we have 3/5, also known as 0.600. So if I add my zeros, that can help us out a little bit. And the good thing about it, it lands perfectly on the number line right over here, and I'm just going to label it as 3/5. After that, we have 0.063. If I add a 0 to it, it's known as 0.630 or 0.630. I apologize for that, so let me just rewrite it over here. 0.63. Following the 13/50, that's 0.650. I'm going to extend that. That's going to be 13/20. And lastly, we have 0.6 repeating for the rest of its life. So that's going to be bigger than 0.660, but smaller than 0.670. So it's going to be a little bit closer over here. And I'll just put it over here, and it's known as 66 2/3%. Sorry that it's so small. And there goes question number 1. Question number 2. Answer the following mentally without using proportion or equation. So since we're solving these mentally, let's use quick strategies instead of formal equations. So like for letter A, what is 10% of 112? So when finding 10% of a number is pretty easy. We're basically dividing that number by 10. Think about the fraction 1/10. 1/10. 10's in the denominator, so it's dividing into whatever's in the numerator. So long story short, we're basically going to just be moving the decimal 1 place to the left. So this 112, move over 1 place, and the answer we get is 11.2. Question letter B. What is 75% of 64? So what we can do is mentally think to yourself, 75% represents 3/4, and that's of 64. Now if you don't know what that is, think to yourself, what is 1/4 of 64? Alright, 64 divided by 4 is 16. And you want to multiply that value by 3. So therefore 3/4 of 64 is equal to 48. Lastly, in letter C, what is 33 1/3% of 60? 33 1/3% is known as 1/3 of 60. And I'm basically doing 3 divided into 60, and that gives us 20. So there goes our answers. Alright, number 3 says to estimate what is 32% of 151, and letter B is what is 49% of 91. So for this question, we can look at 32% as 30, and when we're looking at 151, we can look at that number as 150. Alright, now if we don't know 30% of a number, it's pretty easy to go over 10% of a number, kind of like in letter A for question number 2. And 10% of 150 would be 15, because we're just moving that decimal over. So that would be 15. But we're trying to find 30% of a number, so we want to multiply that by 3. Alright, 30% of 15 is taking that 15, multiplying it by 3, and we end up getting 45. Alright, same concept for letter B. 49% is close to 50%. 91 is close to the number 90. Alright, 50% meaning I'm trying to find half of 90. Half of 90 gives us 45. On to the next question. As for question number 4, we'll be going ahead answering the following question with the percent proportion of the percent equation. Letter A says, what is 28% of 130? Alright, now just keep in mind that the percent proportion compares the part to the whole using a fraction, while the percent equation uses multiplication to find the missing value. So for part A, we set up the proportion. I always recommend writing out the formula first, so let's go ahead and do so. Alright, we're trying to find what is, meaning we don't know the part of 130 since it's out of 130 the whole, and they give us the percent of 28%. Let's go in and substitute. So as you can see up here where I broke up the sentence, what is, meaning I don't know what the part is, we call that x. The percent is 28% of 130. That's going to represent our whole. And then we come back and we set up the percent proportion a little bit further down in blue. Alright, question number 4 says to answer the following using the percent proportion or the percent equation. Letter A, what is 28% of 130? So we're going to start by utilizing percent proportion. Let's write that out. Now that the formula is written out, we're then going to go ahead and break down the sentence. What is, meaning we do not know what the part is. The percent is 28%, and it's out of, meaning our whole is 130. Now let's go ahead and substitute the numbers. We got 28 over 100 equals x over 130. Keep in mind a percent proportion compares the part to the whole using a fraction, while the percent equation uses multiplication to find the missing value. So let's go ahead and cross multiply. And the product of 130 and 28 gives us 3,640. We divide both sides by 100 and we get x is equal to 36.4. Now let's move into the percent equation. We're going to start by writing that down first. The formula is part equals percent times whole. Based on our information earlier, we did not know what the part is. We know our percent is 28%, but our percent is always being displayed as a decimal. Hence that 28 divided by 100, and our whole is 130. We end up finding out that x is equivalent to 36.4, aka 36.40. And that's it for question letter A. Question letter B, let's break down the question. We have what percent, meaning I do not know what percent is. I know it's going to be out of 64. That represents my whole is 16. So when we go back and write down our formula again, as always, now it's time for us to substitute into the formula. Once we've substituted, we can now go ahead and go to our cross multiplication. X times 64, 100 times 16. And when we find the product of the right side, it's equivalent to 1600. Now we need to undo the multiplication and by division so we can isolate the variable x. And we end up finding out that x is going to be equal to 25. Keep in mind that is 25% of 64 is 16. For our percent equation, we start by writing down our equation. Our part is represented by the 16. We did not have the percent, and our whole was 64. The goal is to undo this multiplication by division. We find out that x is equal to 0.25. And since we got a decimal, we want to convert it to a percent. We multiply that by 100. And therefore x is equal to 25. Alright, and just keep in mind that represents 25%. Now on to question letter C. It says 28 is 140% of what number? Alright, 28 represents my part. My percent is 140 of what number represents our whole. So let's go ahead and substitute. When we substitute, we have 140 over 100, because 140 was our percent. Our part is 28, and we don't know what it is out of, so that's going to be our x value. Let's go ahead and cross multiply. We go ahead and cross multiply, we get 140x is equal to 28 times 100. We keep our 140x, 28 times 100 is 2800. And we undo the multiplication with the operation of division. That allows us to isolate the variable x to find out that x is going to be equivalent to 20. Now let's move on to the percent proportion. We start by writing out the percent equation. Now we can go ahead and substitute. Our part was 28. Our percent was 140, but in the percent equation, we turn our percent to a decimal. We divide 140 by 100, we get 1.4, also known as 1.40, and our whole was what we did not know. In order to solve for x, we undo the multiplication with division, divide the right side by 1.4, divide the opposite side by 1.4, and we still end up getting x is equal to 20. And that will be all for task number 1.